So, I guess I should start by mentioning that my name is Eve. I am 24 and my life basically disintegrated 6 months ago. Everyone is acting as if I am a monster, yet they are all just being dramatic. Let me clarify what happened because nobody is reporting this tale correctly. I met Mason when I was 20 and I thought having a stable guy was the dream. He's 28 now, a big shot systems analyst at a computer business, the type of nerd who managed to land a hot wife. That is me, by the way. We were doing well, living in this modest apartment that he primarily paid for while I worked at a fancy restaurant downtown and attended online classes whenever I felt like it. Mason always pretended proud to support my ambitions or whatever, but I could tell he was really judging me for not having my life entirely sorted out. I started at Harvest and Rye around 6 months ago, and it felt like finally having something that was all mine, you know? The crew there is wonderful. We're like a family. Everyone is youthful and fun, and we all seem to click. Especially Chase, the bartender. And before anyone starts making assumptions, nothing happened between us. Chase just gets me. He has a knack of making every shift feel like a party, constantly cracking jokes and making everyone laugh. Mason quickly became suspicious of my presence at the workplace. Chase would text me a humorous meme about something that happened during our shift, and Mason would become quiet and depressed. He'd say something like, "Don't you think Chase is a little too friendly? Perhaps you should mention your marriage at work." God, his lack of confidence was terrible. I mean, Chase is attractive. I am not blind. Maybe he flirts a little, but that is his job. He is a bartender. Mason couldn't handle it. Finally, I had my own thing going on. He was used to me being this beautiful little wife who simply sat at home while he played video games or whatever. The more involved I became in my career, the more he tried to check in on me, popping up for lunch at random like some creepy stalker. My sister, Sarah, came to visit last month and immediately began the same crap. We went to a restaurant on our first night in town. My suggestion, because our cuisine is fantastic, and she freaked out over Chase and I vibing or whatever. After we departed, she attempted to give me a lengthy spiel about playing with fire and respecting limits. I mean, are you serious? You're going to come at me with your 10-year married mom of two wisdom? Not everyone desires a boring life. The odd thing is, I truly liked Mason, to be honest. He was my safe haven, my sure thing. I just wish he had been secure enough to allow me have my own identity other from being his wife. But no, he had to go and make everything odd. And believe me, that's only the beginning of this narrative. Nobody saw what happened next, especially not Mason. Looking back, I can understand why some people believe I should have handled things differently. But really, everything that transpired after this was essentially Mason's insecurities exploding in his face, literally. So things got pretty stressful at home. Mason would attempt to be casual about it, but I could tell he was spying my Facebook page. Watching every time Chase liked one of my posts or remarked something humorous, he'd make subtle passive-aggressive remarks like, "Oh, late shift with Chase again," or "Must it have been a fun night?" I saw all of the photographs. What a great method to expose your obsession, right? I began dreaded returning home after my final shifts because I knew Mason would be sitting there in his gaming chair, seeming to be busy, but really just waiting to grill me. He'd ask me all these specific questions about my night, hoping to trap me in some sort of fib dog, as if I couldn't have friends, simply because I was married. The more he pushed, the more I began to stay out late with my work group. We were simply hanging out at Denny's after our shifts, unwinding and joking about customer drama. Chase realized something was up with me one night and asked what it was. When I informed him about Mason's jealousy, he simply shook his head and stated I deserved better than some insecure guy attempting to control me. It felt amazing to have someone truly see my point of view, you know? Chase always knew how to make me feel better with a simple shoulder bump or a silly joke, and suddenly work felt like an escape from the chaos at home. What really got to me was Mason's attempt to make me feel guilty about getting decent money and tips. For example, he'd say that I must be extremely pleasant with the customers in order to earn that much money. Yes, is it termed being good at my job? Just because he was locked in his dull office all day did not mean I had to pretend I hated my life as well. My coworkers were my true support network. They did not judge me or make me feel bad for having fun. We had a group chat that was regularly flooded with memes and inside jokes, which Mason would undoubtedly dissect for hidden meanings if he knew about them. Chase was generally the one to make everyone chuckle, and yes, his quips were occasionally flirtatious, but that is how people in the restaurant industry are. I did observe Mason becoming increasingly agitated, though. He began going to the gym more frequently, presumably to bulk up. It was really sad. Like watching him compete with people like Chase, who looked good without even trying. He even purchased new clothes and began arranging his hair differently. I suppose I should have found it nice that he was trying so hard, but it came across as desperate. Everything came to a head when our restaurant announced its summer worker celebration. Mason reacted strangely, asking if partners were invited, when I told him it was solely staff, which was true. He had this look on his face as if I had verified all of his concerns. I ended up having to lie and say I had asked my manager about creating an exception in order for him to drop it. I knew bringing him would make things unpleasant. Looking back, I wonder if I should have persevered with that falsehood. Everything started to fall apart a week before the celebration. My sister Sarah decided to play marriage counselor again and showed up unexpectedly at the restaurant during my shift. She sat at the bar, observing everything like a spy. I understood what she was doing. She was trying to catch me doing something wrong so she could go back and report it to Mason. Chase worked that night, and he was just being chased out making jokes, leaning in close to talk during rushes, and caressing my arm when we were laughing about something. Nothing obscene, just standard restaurant fare. But Sarah kept giving me these looks, and I knew what lecture was coming. Sure enough, she cornered me after my shift. "I adore you, Eve, but what are you doing?" She began speaking in a concerned big sister voice. "I observed how you interact with Chase. If I were Mason and saw this," I cut her off right then. I was weary of everyone treating me like I was a child in need of supervision. "If you were Mason," I snapped back, "you'd be a mature man who doesn't need his wife's sister to check on him." That just made her go into full mom mode. She began discussing our parents' divorce, describing how Dad's harmless friendship with his secretary began exactly like this. As if this has anything to do with me, I'm not like Dad. I truly adore Mason. I simply do not believe that being married requires me to abandon my individuality. The next day, Mason did something that demonstrated how pathetic his jealousy had become. He shifted his lunch break to coincide with our pre-shift prep time and began turning up at the restaurant practically daily. He'd sit there with his laptop, seeming to work, but clearly observing every encounter I had with Chase. It was mortifying. Even my coworkers began to notice and make jokes about my personal security guard. Chase handled it admirably. However, he'd make an effort to be extra professional while Mason was there, calling me Mrs. Thompson and hardly looking in my direction. Then, the moment Mason departed, he'd do this hilarious impression of him slumped over his laptop, complete with phony typing and exaggerated suspicious looks. Everyone would break up, and I'd feel the usual relief of being back with folks who understood me. The day before the celebration, Mason attempted to have a serious discussion about our marriage. He sat me down and started talking about how I had changed and how he missed the way we used to be. He started crying a little as he talked about how he thought he was losing me, was both embarrassed and sorry to see him like who gets so riled up about their wife having work friends. I told him he was being theatrical and that he needed to focus on his insecurity, which was getting out of control. I felt a little guilty, so I told him he could still come to the party. His entire face brightened up, and he began talking about how it would be beneficial for him to get to know my work colleagues better. I recall thinking how annoying it would be to have to babysit his feelings all night. I had no idea what was about to happen. The celebration started off normal enough. We had booked out the back room of a neighborhood tavern, and everyone was in a good mood. Mason was trying way too hard, doing this strange, false laugh whenever anyone told a joke. I kept noticing him observing me, especially when Chase was present. Chase practically ran the party, preparing special cocktails and getting everyone excited. I was having fun despite Mason's presence. Our crew has a habit of taking group shots whenever we get together, so when Chase called everyone together for photos, I didn't hesitate. We were pressed together, and Chase had his arm around my shoulders. Isn't this just typical party behavior? But I could see Mason's face becoming increasingly red from across the room. Looking back, I probably should have noticed Chase's excessive drinking. He became more tactile as the night progressed, straightening my hair and placing his hand on my back as he squeezed by me. At one point, he whispered something in my ear about a funny customer anecdote, and I could feel Mason's gaze on us, but I was not doing anything wrong. If Mason chose to torture himself all night, it was his decision. Everything exploded when Chase began telling everyone about this regular client who had been hitting on me all week. He was doing his usual thing, acting it out and making everyone laugh. He then replied something like, "Don't worry, Mason, I've been protecting your girl," and winked at me. I laughed because, well, what else are you meant to do? But Mason sprang up abruptly, knocking his chair over. As Mason approached, the entire room quieted down. His voice trembled as he asked Chase what he meant by "your girl." Chase simply smirked and replied, "Maybe if you checked on your wife more, other guys wouldn't have to." And then, I swear I'm not making this up, Mason attempted to appear tough. He got up in Chase's face and muttered something about honoring marriage, Chase simply chuckled and advised Mason to keep better track of his wife because I apparently never mentioned being married at work, which was not entirely true. I mean, people knew I had a husband. I simply didn't make it the focus of my personality. Mason's face became absolutely white. He looked at me like he had no idea who I was. What happened next was quite rapid. Mason shoved Chase, which was startling given that Mason had never fought in his life. Chase scarcely moved. He conducts boxing training 3 times each week. He merely looked at Mason regretfully and said, "Man, it's no surprise your wife seeks my attention." I knew Mason would do something stupid. I could see it on his face. But before I could say anything, he attempted to deliver this horrible excuse. For a punch, Chase just moved significantly before Mason was knocked out cold by a single hit. Surprisingly, I felt afraid at the time. I dashed over to Mason, attempting to wake him up while someone called an ambulance. Chase merely stood there, astonished, as if he hadn't intended to punch him so hard. The party went apart after that. I rode to the hospital with Mason, but the entire time I was thinking about how he had destroyed everything by trying to be tough. What did he think was going to happen? The first several days after the occurrence were really strange. Mason scarcely spoke to me, instead moped around the apartment with a kicked puppy expression on his face. Everyone kept implying that I needed to resign my work or something. Even Chase was being distant at work, which was completely unneeded. Like, it wasn't my fault Mason chose to play tough guy. About 2 weeks later, I was telling our new hostess the incident, and I found myself giggling. I mean, that was fairly amusing when you think about it. Mason tries to be all macho and gets felled with a single punch. After that, it became a running joke. Whenever Mason tried to talk to me about working on our marriage or something, I just laugh and say, "Remember what happened last night? Insecure." Mason would have this look on his face whenever I brought it up, like if he was about to cry or something. However, he needed to learn to joke about it. It was in the past, and being overly emotional about it did not help anyone. I told him that's what he gets for attempting to appear tough when everyone knows that's not who he is. The real turmoil began when he discovered I was still working for Chase. He truly expected me to quit my work because of his injured ego. I shut that down quickly. "What? You want a rematch?" I'd say and burst out laughing. Mason would simply go quiet and leave the room. It became my go-to response anytime he tried to challenge me on anything. Our pals began to act strangely about it, like if we were at dinner with our couple friends, Mike and Jenny, and Mason was attempting to discuss a work advancement he had received. I wasn't paying attention, so I just cut him off with, "Yeah, just try not to get knocked out celebrating." Mike and Jenny just sat there staring at their dishes, and I giggled. Mason got up and exited the restaurant. What a drama queen. The fact is, I seldom spoke to Chase at work anymore. He kept his distance, which was okay. I had other work pals, but I was not going to allow Mason's insecurity rule my life. Every time he mentioned me quitting, I reminded him of his last clever suggestion. "Chase understands how to take a joke," I remark as Mason's face crumbled. Mason became increasingly quiet over the course of several weeks. He started sleeping in the guest room, which was actually rather nice. No more lectures about working late hours or him checking my phone while I slept. When his mother called to check on him, I gave her the entire tale, chuckling at how her son tried to be tough. She hung up on me. Talk about not being able to take jokes. The strange thing was that the more Mason backed away, the more I brought up the knockout dot. It felt as if I couldn't control myself. I'd shut him down whenever he attempted to be tough, by reminding him of what occurred the previous time he tried. I didn't understand what the big issue was. If he was still humiliated by it, it was his problem. Maybe if he hadn't tried to dominate me and appear tough, none of this would have happened. We were having supper with his parents on the night that everything finally went apart. Mason was trying to talk about our future or something, and I couldn't help myself. "Remember the time you tried to be tough but got knocked out?" I started laughing, but for once, no one was even appearing to smile. His mother got up and left the table. Mason didn't even look at me, instead staring at his plate with an empty expression I'd never seen before. The next day, I returned home after my shift to discover half of the flat deserted. His gaming system, clothes, and all of his nerdy collectibles are gone. His mother had helped him move out while I was at work. All he left was a note explaining how continuing my job and consistently ridiculing him demonstrated how little I cared about him. Like a method to be theatrical, I immediately went on Facebook to give my side of the incident, but many actually took his side. My sister said she saw this coming and that I should be ashamed of myself. Ashamed? Please, I'm young, attractive, and finally free of his insecurity and turmoil. I blocked anyone who sought to attack me with that negativity. Okay, maybe things have become a little hard since then, The apartment is ridiculously costly on my server wage, and I had to start selling some of my luxury bags to pay the rent. However, this is just transitory. A wicked bitch like myself does not require a man to survive. So what if I had to decrease my phone plan and begin taking the bus? At least I'm not dealing with someone attempting to dominate my life anymore. Everyone is acting as if I'm the evil person here, yet I stayed to my promises. I remained with him even after he embarrassed himself in front of all of my coworkers. If anything, he was the one who abandoned our marriage just because he couldn't. Take a joke. His entire family blocked me after he left, which is quite childish. Chase seldom talks to me at work anymore. Men are quite sensitive. Yeah, maybe I eat ramen for dinner most nights and have had to start donating plasma to make ends meet. But it isn't the point. The point is, I'm now living life on my own terms. So what if my electricity was turned off last week? At least no. One is trying to tell me who I can be friends with or where I can work. I'm already on some dating apps, seeking for someone on my level, someone who can handle a self-confident woman while also taking a joke. The proper guy will recognize that I'm not your typical wife who simply does everything her husband says. Sure, my credit score has plummeted and I'm behind on every bill, but those are just numbers. I'm out here living my best life, my sister. Constantly telling me I need therapy and should accept responsibility for my behavior. Whatever. She's just jealous because I'm young and single while she's stuck in her boring motherhood life. What if I had to explain to my landlord for the third time why my rent was late? That's only transitory. A queen like me always lands on her feet. My main regret is that I wasted 4 years with someone who couldn't handle a strong woman. Maybe. Next time I'll discover a true man who won't cry at a silly joke. And yes, I miss Mason on occasion when I'm eating my third cup of ramen of the day or avoiding debt collector calls, but it's his loss, not mine. He's the one that walked away from all of this, pointing to my overdue bills and vacant apartment. After a little incident, I mean, it is not my fault that he couldn't take a joke, right?